Welcome to Ignite the Spark Within, a podcast designed to do just that, ignite your spark within you. I'm your host, Sarah Malone, owner of Spark Fitness and Lifestyle Coaching and voted Yahoo Finance's top 10 female coaches to follow in 2021. I believe everyone has a fire inside them, a powerful purpose, a story waiting to be told, and everyone can uncover and unleash this power. Every day you have the choice to either let your experiences shape you or take control and use your experiences to shape the world around you. You were made to experience happiness, freedom, joy, purpose, love, passion, and abundance. Disrupt the status quo, think for yourself, and join forces with those around you doing the same. Join me for thought-provoking conversations along with the strategies needed in order to help you ignite your spark within. All right. Well, welcome back to the show, everyone. So today's episode is brought from a topic that a while back I put a Q&A form for some requests for some episode topics. And a request came through on the topic of ego death. And so I thought it important to dive into this one today, as it was a lot deeper, a lot more in depth than I anticipated as I begun to take the journey down, getting an episode ready for this topic. And so I want to dive into this topic of ego death and killing the ego and the death of the ego, which is what we hear a lot these days in this season that we're in. And people are throwing out this, kill the ego, the death of the ego. And I don't think we really understand what that means. And so I want to bring a little bit of spirituality together with a little bit of psychology to break down this killing the ego. And the question was actually like, how do you go through an ego death, or how do you go through the death of the ego, which is what we are told that we should be doing. And so I want to take us on a journey. First, we'll start out with my personal opinion and how I believe there's a little bit of misinformation around killing the ego. We'll start with where this term comes from. And I believe that it is rooted in the Bible, actually, when, the Bible tells us and talks about deny yourself and pick up your cross, which means crucify yourself. And then I think we've turned this in this portion of spirituality into a killing your ego, the death of the ego, so that all that's left is the soul. And I want to explain why this is beneficial to kill the ego. But again, I think there's some misinformation here. Because in order to kill the ego completely, we would not be human. The ego aspect of us is what makes us human beings. So I'd like to propose that we can reconsider what this term means at its core, and to kill the ego. I'd like us to shift our perspective of this towards recognizing what the ego is, what makes a dysfunctional ego, and then what makes a functional ego. Because when the ego is functioning healthily without any traumatic attachments or unhealed wounds, the ego is actually very, very vital and beneficial to the human experience. And I'll go into the details of what I mean by that as we go on. But more importantly, I want to reframe this killing the ego and reframe it towards saying that we want to have an integrated ego. We want to integrate our ego with our self, with a capital S, which is really just the soul level of us. So we have the ego aspect and we have the self. And so the problem is not with the ego itself. The problem comes when we have a dysfunctional or a dysfunctioning ego that is not properly integrated with our self, capital S. And so we don't want to kill off the part of us that makes us human, but we do want to take some time. And this is what I think a lot of us are being provoked to do. we do want to take some time to get to know the dysfunctional ego aspects, which we'll call, in the purposes of this episode, the parts of us, because we have different parts of the ego, and I will break those down in just one moment. But back to the killing of the ego, I think we've derived this saying because as humans, as sinful humans, because none of us are perfect. Obviously, if we would, we'd be Jesus and we'd reached the level of consciousness that everybody aspires to, which usually happens to be heaven. So we know this ego to be a dysfunctional part of us, and this gets in the way of the soul or the self. And so this is why people have started to say, kill the ego, kill your ego. And so I'd like to, again, propose, before we take off on a lot of information. This episode's going to pack a lot of information. You guys know me. If you listen to my podcast before, I go a lot on intuition and on my internal knowing and knowledge. But there's a lot of actual scientific information to be unpacked when it comes to the ego, the parts of the ego, the self, the conscious, the subconscious, which Freud called the unconscious, but we've redefined that, thank God. And so we're going to start with why we don't want to kill the ego, but rather we want an integrated ego that is led by the self and then managed by a well-functioning ego. So again, we'll just start by saying the ego is what makes us human beings. It's what separates us from all spiritual beings. And it's actually why we are the right hand, the number two, when it comes to hierarchy. When we're talking God and then other spiritual beings, it actually goes God, human beings, and then all the other spiritual beings, plants and animals and things like that. And the only what separates us and what makes us higher on that hierarchy is this thing called the ego. It's the consciousness, right? The ego is just another word for consciousness, meaning that there is an ability to be consciously aware and then derive certain meanings and operate ourselves. And that would be called free will. That would be called choice, right? All other beings, and I would include animals in this, they don't have the mechanism where they think rationally about decisions that they're making and, in their experience and their interactions. I mean, when is the last time you've seen a dog get yelled at and then, sit there for days and just sit in that trauma and dissect it or read into every little thing? Now they do have spirit and they do have the ability to feel, and thus when traumas do happen to them, they learn from those and then they base their actions on those. But they're different in the fact that they don't have a mechanism that is going to help them to consciously maneuver the world in a way where they're self-sufficient, right? They operate on instinct for the most part. And that one's arguable. I'm sure we could go down a rabbit hole on that one. But the core point I'm making that can't be argued is that they don't have the same aspects of the ego like that come into play as humans do. And so same with plants and same with the angels, the angel spirit in form, and they don't think about ego as far as competition. They just exist, they know their purpose, and they do it. So there is a sense of separation between all these different levels, and the human, what makes us human is this conscious level, this conscious layer, this ego. And so why would we want to kill the very thing that makes us human? It's what allows us to have this human experience in a way that nobody else does. Right? We get to experience life and find purpose and navigate joy and navigate grief and go through this entire array and roller coaster of experiences and finding and losing and we can go on and on about that, but that's not the purpose of this episode. So why then are we being told to kill the very thing that makes us human being? Well, again, I think the underlying motto of, you know, kill yourself and take up your cross is valid in the fact where I believe that it was meant in the Bible to say, do away with your selfish desires and take up my way, Jesus way, God way, the way. The Tao says the Tao, which is the way. And so when we consistently say no to the ego's temptations or selfish desires or lustful temptations, greed. Those are the aspects of the ego that we're referring to that we want to, quote unquote, kill in order to live more of an astute life, kind of highly connected with spirit. So there's lots to go into on that. But what I'd like to say is to shift this term of death of the ego and really call this more of a butterfly effect, where we're continually going through a process of cocoon. The word I'm looking for is we're entering a cocoon to be nurtured and transformed, only to come out free again. And I think in life's experiences, we do this many times over and over and over again. This is a process. And again, I'm calling it the butterfly effect. This butterfly effect happens over and over and over again if we're really doing the work. So I'd like to now segue this topic into defining the ego as we know it, as psychology knows it, into the three different parts of the ego. Now, before we go on, I'd like to say that we all have many different parts. They're literally in psychology and psychoanalysis and hypnotherapy and other such studies. We refer to these as the parts, our parts. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the show. Hey, I'm going to make this really quick. On October 20th through the 23rd, if you are a woman or even if you are a man who knows a woman, any woman that would benefit from this experience, I'm hosting a retreat with my dear friend Kim Egger in Arizona in the beautiful and spiritual Red Rocks of Sedona. We are very excited to bring this retreat. I've been hard at work at creating the content for this retreat for the past 2 years, ever since the pandemic hit. And what I realize is that these women, all people really, but right now we're focused on the healing of the divine feminine. And this is really just going to provide a space for growth, for healing, for rest and reprieve, as that is desperately what we need right now. And the contents and the guidance of somebody facilitating an actual growth experience instead of leaving you out in the cold. If traditional therapy doesn't appeal to you, which it doesn't appeal to most, then this is a great way to experience the healing and transformational experience that something like that can offer you, but in a place where it's completely away from your normal routine, family, friends, and environment. It is a chance to connect with other women that are like-minded and on the same pursuit as you. And we're just going to spend 3 nights together in the beautiful Red Rocks of Arizona, healing, growing, doing the work, meditating, doing breath work, and exploring nature. So if this calls to you, if this appeals to you, we have limited spots available for this retreat, and we're just so excited to bring it to you. So you can email me at sarah@sparkflc.com or at any of the links in my social media bios. You'll find a link there to book a connection call with me, just to make sure that this retreat truly is for you. I also wanted to make an announcement of our sponsors of the show and just thank them. First sponsor is Spark Fitness and Lifestyle Coaching, my baby. This is a holistic health and wellness company that has expanded over the years to include things like Reiki and energy healing, guided and channeled meditations. We do activations of spiritual gifts. We also offer live in-person events for women only and for men and women, like the yoga and sound bowl healing sessions and the full moon women's gathering. There is so much to offer in this one space: fitness, nutrition, holistic healing, you name it, and it's going to be covered under mind, body, and spirit with Spark. And I'm very honored to partner with other partners and investors now to be able to sponsor this show. Our next sponsor, Juice Plus. I've said it, and I've said it ad nauseum now, that I am not a huge supplement fan, but Juice Plus captured my attention with its ability to bring an immunity aspect to me and help me to function at a higher level, which I was shocked to find out that we are recommended to consume 9 to 16 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And I don't know about you, but that's a lot of food to consume. And with our busy lifestyles, which I'm not condoning, by the way, it can be hard to consume that much food. So what's cool about Juice Plus is that all of this is holistic. It is legitimately powdered fruits and vegetables in a capsule, so you don't have to drink a nasty fruits and greens powder. They also come in gummies if you're not a pill swallower. I don't mind it, so I do the reds, the greens, and the purples, and their fish oil, their omega blend. And I have to say, aside from just taking care of my health, which sometimes can be unseen and unfelt, I legitimately feel a difference in my ability to recover, in my health and vitality and energy. And it's almost like a space is created in your system, and you just feel like things are more oxygenated, which, come to learn, that's its sole purpose, to oxygenate your system. So as an athlete and as a workhorse, even if you don't work out strenuously, even if you just live a lifestyle in which you're working a lot, you're creating what's called oxidative stress in your system. And oxidative stress can be very detrimental. It's what reduces your immunity. It's what causes inflammation. It's what harms recovery and muscle building, among other things. So Juice Plus has been a huge crutch and an important aspect in my own journey, not just athletic endeavors, but health as well. So if you need any more information on those, please hit the links in the show notes. They'll take you directly to Spark, the retreat page, and then Juice Plus. And hey, if this podcast is adding value to your life in any way, I just want to ask, there is a donate button. You can donate whatever, however little or as much as you want. It does not have to be recurring, but just as a thank you for, continuing to provide valuable content on this page. It really helps to keep this podcast going and just supports good quality information. You can find that link in the show notes as well. It's what began this show in the first place, and everything is welcome. At the end of the day, my mission is just to continue bringing you high quality, good conversations, a place to come to learn and hear vulnerability, and then so that you become a stronger and more capable human being as well. So anything is much appreciated to help continue this show. And before you get bored and start skipping, let's get back to the show. Right? And we all have many different parts, and we're really just referring to the aspects of the ego. And within each aspect, there are 3, which within each aspect of the ego, there's going to be many different parts that come up, which are all just parts of you based on your previous experiences. So let's go over the 3 different types of the ego. We have the child, the parent, and the adult. The child, the parent, and the adult. So let's take this now and we'll define each of these aspects. Now, the child is the aspect of the ego in which I think a lot of us have forgotten about. And then the adult is an area that we have underdeveloped in my experience and in my observations. And then the parent is kind of the aspect I see of the ego that is the most dysfunctional And usually the dysfunctional ego is due to a result of the child and the parent at odds. And so let me break that down for you. So the child part of your ego is usually the one that's crying for things that it needs, right? If you take a child before traumas have been introduced to their lives, they are very vocal. They have no problem telling you what they need, what they want, what they like, what they don't like. And they will cry out. And what happens to the child part of the ego is if and when, because it's inevitable that this will happen, if and when this child calls out based off of hurt or a need and doesn't get this met, it turns into fear. And if this level cannot be expressed, then this part turns into either anger or depression. Anger or depression. So child feels hurt or there's a fear, cries out, either doesn't get it met right away, and then we continue the cycle, or worse, the person who he's crying out to get this hurt or this pain relieved from is the inducer of the pain itself. So here's where the dysfunction happens at the child level. I'm hurt by mom. I cry out. The only person I know to cry out to is mom, motherly figure. And when I say mom, I'm not actually saying mother who birthed me. I'm saying the motherly figure, the motherly role in that person's life. And maybe it's actually their dad. Maybe it's a teacher. Okay. So their motherly figure, their parental role, they know that they are the provider of their needs. So I'm a child. I know you're the provider of my needs, and yet you've just hurt me. And now I'm trying to cry out to the person who hurt me, and I'm not able to get that cry heard or relieved or solved or needs met. Okay, this turns into fear. And when the inevitable fear isn't being quelled, since it came from that motherly figure, this turns into anger or depression, which then can result in many physical and mental and emotional dysfunctions, such as, well, depression, anxiety, bitterness, resentment, lashing out. All of these things start to derive from this dysfunctioning child ego place. Okay, the child ego says, no, I want to be heard. I want this. I need to be nurtured. I want your love. Okay. And so it's that in these moments of child upbringing that the child ego becomes now dysfunctioning. Now, there's an alternate ego in each and every one of us and outside, of course, called the parent ego. Now, if we just let the child run amok, the dysfunctioning child run amok, well, we wouldn't get anything done. We'd be in big, big trouble. So the parent ego at some point needs to step in and say, no, you got to do this. You need to do this. You ought to do this. So it's this judgment on, see, this is because you were wrong. This is because you were lazy. This is because you're bad. This is because you're not worthy. And so whether this parent aspect, that mechanism can actually come from an outside source, meaning an actual parent or a friend or a family member, or again, a teacher that now places judgment, and it's like a judgment and almost expectations on this dysfunctioning child to try to, see when it's coming intrinsically, meaning from inside, this isn't necessarily bad. It's coming out in the wrong way, but it's meant to protect the child, right? It's meant to protect the child from further hurt or harm, or just helping this child to move past this moment and survive. So the parent ego is going to step in and take over and try to rationalize what's going on so the child can understand it in some way, make sense of it. So, okay, if I'm just ugly and lazy, well, that makes sense why I was left crying in my bed and nobody came to save me, or that makes sense why Mom yelled at me when I didn't get an A on my paper, whatever the circumstance may be. And then we can take that to more serious issues where, you know, I'm just not worthy of love, and that's why my father or my brother or something, sexually abused me. This becomes very, very important when we're talking about the aspects of the ego, and how, again, we don't want to kill this. We need to come to a place of integrating, understanding, and healing those aspects. Okay, there's a third aspect of the ego, and this is the adult. And this is really what we want to be nurturing and in tune with, and helping to reach our child and our parent egos. The adult ego is kind of like the moderator. It's like the voice of reason, right? It does two things. It's going to hold the space for the child, and it's also going to be the voice of reason for the parent to say, well, at some point, you know, they're right in the fact that you can't do that. You've got to change that. Or if you want love, I should rephrase that. Because you don't have to do anything to be able to receive love. But if you don't want this result to happen, then let's take this approach. So the adult is going to come in between the child and the parent and be the voice of reason, the moderator, and really be able to step in and bring us back to center so we can move forward in a more healthy manner. The problem is when either the child or the parent is running the show and not the adult. And the adult, I would say, is the closest version to self, capital S, self, that we can relate to. Although it is still a level of consciousness that requires a lot of thought. So in practices like hypnotherapy, what the aim is to get you to a subconscious level that can become in tune with your child and parent, kind of isolate those, bring them up here out in front so that you can be the adult in watching that dynamic. So you're taking a step back and becoming the observer. So you're going to take a step back as the adult and become the observer, or with the help of your therapist, your hypnotherapist, or other therapist, can be the adult figure in that role to help the child and the parent stop being at odds with each other. So what happens is this is how the ego becomes dysfunctional. It's when the child or the parent are running the show, and what we find then is the ego begins to sabotage the self. Unbeknownst to us, this is something that happens on a subconscious level. And again, Freud called it unconscious, meaning, that it's beneath our level of awareness, which in some regard is true. As a matter of fact, we operate more from a subconscious place than a conscious place. I think the percentage is upwards of 80 to 98% subconscious, meaning if you really think about what that means, that 80 to 98% of our living is done from a place of unconsciousness, basically, that we don't even realize, which is kind of scary, because this is how we can get to places that we never thought possible as human beings, because we just didn't even see it. We're just not looking at it. So this is why internal work is so important, because so that we can become aware of our subconscious and get to know it. And so again, reiterating, this is why I do not think that this whole death of the ego death, dark night of the soul, I love all these phrases and what they're trying to get us to do, but at the end of the day, it's incorrect, and it can be very dangerous. So what we want to do is we want to integrate these parts. We want to integrate them with the self, and to where they're allowed a space for a time to say what it is they need, Because at the end of the day, our ego is put in place to protect us, right? That's its main function, is to protect us. And then the self, the function of the self is there to get us to enjoy life, to have pleasure, to have joy, to have love, deep, deep love and reverence, and into to find purpose and fulfillment, right? That's the deeper meaning of life. And that's really why we want the self to be activated and allowed the space. But if we have a dysfunctioning ego, we really can't do that. And so this is why we want to integrate these two. And I'm going to go now into a couple ways, some steps, some things that need to happen in order to safely go through this butterfly effect of, going down to the depths, getting to know that, letting it cocoon and blossom, and then breaking forth and breaking free. Because that again, that is a process, and it's a process that happens over and over and over again. It's called growth, guys. It's called the purpose of life. And because we're constantly in a universe that changes, we're going to be hopefully changing too. And this is going to require us to continually seek transformation from experiences that are constantly happening around us, to us, through us, sometimes because of us. That's a whole nother topic for another episode. So let's go over now how to safely and effectively go through the butterfly effect, aka integration of the ego. First, I want to point out that this should never or very rarely be done alone. This is very, very serious and hard work, guys. And so I highly, highly encourage you to do this with someone, whether it's a trained professional, a therapist, a hypnotherapist. I do hypnotherapy. I also do energy work, but this is something a little bit different, right? This is taking your participation. So really be cautious and conscious of this, that this was work that should be done with someone. At the very least, rarely alone, because at the end of the day, the whole reason you're here in the first place is because of your own mind and whatever blocks are there. And most of the time we are not able to see which doors are locked or blocking us. So how could we go through them if we don't even know where they are? Okay, our own minds can sometimes be our biggest enemies, even though they are our biggest friend and best source of information. We sometimes need the assistance to get to a level where we have access to that information, meaning the subconscious. It's called shadow work because of the fact that these areas or these parts of us or this information that we carry, since DNA is literally just, it's like a computer base, it's carrying information with it. So the reason it's called shadow work is because it's in the shadows, you can't see it. So unless you're very, very ritualistic and disciplined in your meditative practice, which regardless, I would still encourage you to do, please seek the help of someone else. Okay. The next thing we need in order to effectively go through the butterfly effect or the integration of the ego is to do some regressions. Now, regressions, I think, carries with it some negative connotations. Nobody wants to go backwards, right? And we all want to keep moving forwards. But sometimes we have to pause for the cause, and in order to go forwards, we must go backwards. And I don't mean to regress to become less. I mean, let's just take a trip back and go and revisit some of those past traumas or experiences that maybe induced a child part of the ego to come up and start causing havoc. I'll try to think of an example of a dysfunctioning child would be your we'll take the male ego, child ego, for instance. A male dysfunctioning child ego. How could I bet we could all do this practice together. Let's paint the picture of what a dysfunctioning child ego would look like in a man. And more often than not, it's going to look like a has trouble getting along with women, um, has anger issues, or mommy issues. Maybe they have the macho man image. It's trying to portray this macho man image. The child ego could be even, can manifest itself in a serious way. If we want to take this off of humor and put this on something that's more tangible that we can see in the world actually right now, currently, live experiences. To dysfunctioning child ego in a man could turn into someone who ends up, one of these mass school shootings, God forbid. And so this is how the child ego can rear its ugly head in a masculine way, and then in a feminine way. This could look like having daddy issues. A child ego in a female could be looking for love in all the wrong places, seeking sex from men, just to get that validation. It could be in all of these. It could be alcoholism, just to escape and run and feel something. In the feminine, it could look like, honestly, addictions to anything, like, um, you know, financially trying to get that attention through buying, we're doing plastic surgeries, expensive purses, things of this nature. And so I think you guys are getting the trend here. Or even a dysfunctioning child ego in a woman would be just highly, highly emotional. Usually the dysfunctioning child ego in a female results in depression, or they turn up their masculine side and they become highly, driven and focused. And I'm a feminist, I'm an independent, and they're high achievers. So, don't be mistaken when you see people of this nature who, women have this high masculinized side of them. There's something at the core level that's dysfunctioning in them, and that's not allowing them to be, maybe who, maybe the more balanced and even keeled person that they are. That's not to say that a high functioning female, or male for that matter, successful, driven, is always dysfunctioning with some trauma. I think we're all carrying around some level of trauma to some regard, and we're just going to manifest that in different ways. But more so, what I use these examples is to help you to identify what the child ego, the dysfunctioning child ego, looks like, how as we grow up with that dysfunctioning child ego, what that looks like. It looks like the codependent. It looks like the person who's just seeking attention all the time, who needs constant validation. It's looking for that person who goes job to job and just keeps getting fired, or relationship to relationship, and keeps, cheating or something. So they're all rearing its ugly head. And the parent ego, dysfunctioning parent ego, could actually again be, you know, very stringent, very structured, like no breaking the rules, like you've got to have it all together, portray this picture of having it all together. You've got to do this in order for people to like you. And so you've got to have this job in order to be successful. And this parent ego is going to come in and be highly judgmental, and it's going to be highly judgmental towards yourself. So there's these people that become highly critical, self-critical. Perfectionism is a dysfunctional parent ego trait. Judgmental attitudes towards others. Because let's be real, if you're judging yourself, you're probably going to be judging others too. So I just kind of wanted to take a back step and just to give us some examples of what these parts play. The dysfunctioning parent ego could come up as, don't speak your truth, stay away from conflict. It's the avoider of conflict. It's the fear to speak up for yourself. It's the fear to be yourself, the fear to dress the way that you want or pursue that job. So it's really that stringent and very strict, ridiculing figure. And then the child is the other one, the one that's going to act out whether it's the causing the conflict or, like I said, highly emotional or stubborn. Oh my gosh, the kid that's stubborn is like, you're going to tell me to do this, I'm going to do the opposite. So we get these two clashes, and you can go off and probably ponder many different ways and how this would apply to you, because really that's what we're talking about here. I don't want us to take this episode and then say, aha, I should want my husband to listen to this because he's so egotistical and his child ego is so out of control. It's like, no, guys, let's sit here and let's self-reflect and say, what parts of these do I identify with? And then what ways are my dysfunctional child ego rearing up right now? And why? Where does that come from? Where along the way did someone tell me that, whether they said it blatantly or through their actions or through their nonverbal communications to me, where did I learn that, like, I'm not worthy of love? Or that, that I need to do X in order to be loved by a man, or that I had to be this certain way. There's a lot of self-discovery here. There's a lot of learning to be done. And so we'll go back now to the ways to safely and effectively go through this butterfly effect, because we were on the topic of regressions, which is just basically visiting these past traumas to identify, where did this dysfunction start happening? Again, we'll use hypnotherapy because it's one of the best tools to do this, is to take this trip back at the core. And what's cool about hypnotherapy is you have the chance of revisiting old experiences, and you've hit the source when change happens on the other side of it. So sometimes you can go back to a memory and you can say, yeah, that for sure feeds my child dysfunction of not feeling worthy. But was it the source? Was it the onset experience? And that's really what we want to get to, guys, is getting to this onset, where the root cause, and the root cause is just basically the source of the dysfunction or the dis-ease. So we need help in revisiting that traumatic experience event. Even if we don't heal in that moment, we need to identify where that part of the ego was harmed, and then why this dysfunction started happening. That's not just to say that we need to revisit every single trauma, because some of them are they're not big enough to make an impact that's going to upheave your whole life. But also, that's to say, again, we don't need to revisit every individual experience of a traumatic event that would be associated with not feeling worthy or not feeling loved, because we only really need to visit one, and that's the root. That's where it began. And I would say step 3 for that then is, once we've identified that experience, that moment, that pivotal moment, stop and have compassion for yourself. Just sit there for a moment and just have compassion for yourself, and also others. If there are others involved in this experience for you, stop, have compassion for yourself and for the others, because, maybe they were just doing the best that they could given where they were at in their life. And you may be the source of somebody else's traumas, that they're going to have to do the same work that you're doing. So it's important that we have compassion, that we have empathy for ourselves, because we only did what we knew how to do, given the knowledge that we had in that moment right then and there. Have compassion for yourself and others. Step 4 is to start reprogramming and reframing. So now that we've identified, we've regressed to the main experience, the onset of this dysfunction between child and parent, we now need to work on reprogramming it. And usually this isn't very hard once you've gotten to the core. The harder part is getting to the core. But then once we're there, we can really have the adult aspect of the ego step in and be the one who says, okay, child, part of the ego, you're speaking to yourself now. You're going to say, Okay, we're doing this. So what is it that you need? You know, what did you need here? Um, okay, hold that space. And it's okay. And just let that part of, again, this is all done through either therapy. You could do this through meditation. You could try to do it by yourself, but chances are you might not get to that subconscious. You might not cross that barrier of the conscious and unconscious, or I'm sorry, subconscious mind. I don't like when Freud says unconscious. Cross that barrier of the conscious and subconscious mind, because this is called the critical faculty. There's a barrier between the conscious and subconscious mind called the critical faculty, and it's just meant to separate those parts and protect, and to use some level of rationale to see if what we're experiencing, does this make sense? Do I want to do this based on my level of discernment? And it's always good that we have some level of critical faculty, otherwise we become too gullible, but not too much. Otherwise, we are not open enough to receive new information that could help us. Okay, we'll go into that in a moment. But the reprogramming and reframing, you're going to take this child and you're just going to hold that child, and you're going to let it know that it's okay to feel whatever it is that it's feeling. It's okay that it felt that in the moment. It's okay to feel that now. And then you're going to speak to the parent. And you're going to say, well, why, what do you think? What have you been seeing? What have you been noticing? Okay, here we go. And we're going to start that communication until we get to a point of saying, child, I understand. That totally makes sense. And you know what? I'm going to give you what you need, and give it what it needs. Because chances are you have the resources available to you, whether it's love, compassion, support, whatever that is. And maybe you have to come out of that experience and then seek what it is you really need now from others. Like, hey, if you're in a good relationship, hey, I really need more support here, and here's why. Or I just need to start love. I need to work on my self-love. I need to love myself, and I need to gain some confidence. So you're gonna do this type of communication. The adult part of you, or with the help of your therapist, again, is gonna do this communication. This is integration. That's the integration process right there. And your adult is the higher self. It's the higher version of you that is coming in to assist in this solving of the problems. It's the mediator. It's the voice of reason. So the reprogramming and reframing, and then maybe even just reframing that experience to say, to understand a new meaning to it, or to say, oh my God, that wasn't really what I thought it was. Maybe they weren't saying that I'm not worthy at all. Or maybe, oh my gosh, my mom was just so caught up in trying to survive with us that she couldn't even be there. And so she didn't neglect me. She didn't hate me. Oh my gosh. And it's a new level of understanding now that you're more mature, you're more conscious, you're more experienced. You can bring that new experience and that new wisdom and maturity into the picture and just say, no, it wasn't that at all. I love you, and the totally valid why you would think that, child self, but here is a different perspective. Okay, and that's the process of reprogramming and reframing. So let's just go down the list so far. This is how to safely and effectively go through the butterfly effect, the integration of the ego. Number one is do it with someone, never alone, or at least rarely alone. Number two is regressions. So let's go back to that past trauma experience, at least the very source of it. Visit the pivotal moment when this dysfunction took root. Number three is have compassion for yourself and others. Always compassion. Please always lead with compassion. Number four is reprogramming and reframing. So let's take this moment now, communicate between the child and the parent, taking the position now of the adult so that you can be the mediator. And number five is now a replacement with a new healthy habit. Okay, so now that we've gotten to the source, now that we've in some regard begun healing that child to help them understand something different. We can't just, remove this. We can't just say, okay, stop doing whatever you're doing. Because at some level, your ego began doing certain things because it was either filling a need, emotional, physical, or spiritual, um, or to protect you. And so we've got to replace it somehow. So let's say if you feel like nobody loves you, if you don't feel loved, and what did you need in that moment? Well, I needed to be loved. I needed to be held. Um, okay, well then how can you hold yourself more? Or do you have a relationship where they desire to hold you and you're just not able to let go enough to let them hold you? Maybe let's try doing that. Why don't you start by allowing yourself to be held, whether by yourself or by your partner? That's one example. Maybe the dysfunction was, addiction to substance or to work because you either wanted to escape or you just wanted to feel worthy or valuable through the work that you were doing. And so you can't just say, well, it's like, well, what did you need? I need to feel worthy. I needed to feel like what I am doing and who I am is good enough. Okay, well then, obviously overworking yourself isn't working. It's not the healthy part of the ego. So let's use your terminology now and say let's kill that part of the ego. So we can take up the role of the higher self and say, you know what, whenever I feel the need to just keep doing, I'm going to stop. I'm going to breathe and I'm just going to remember that I am enough without doing anything. And I'm going to tell them, I'm going to recite that to myself. I'm going to have these affirmations that I can tell myself, you are worthy. You are enough. You are loved. And you don't need to do anything, or you can speak to your partner or your family members and say, can you guys just help me out here? Like I need a reminder that I am enough, that I am valuable, that I don't need to achieve things in order to be good enough. Can you help me out? Can you just like text me once a week, twice a week? Okay, this is part of replacing that new habit. And this is actually the healing process. It's one thing to get to the root cause and then understand, okay, I don't need to do that anymore. But then it's another thing to begin to unwire years and years of patterns and habits. And we do that by replacing them with new neural pathways, new habits, new neurochemical connections and neurological, new firing of new synapses in order to create this new being, which would eventually fly out of the cocoon like one beautiful butterfly. And that's what leads me to my last step is consistency in the cocoon. When you're in this cocoon stage of rewiring and reframing and reminding yourself, because in something like a hypnotherapy session or just a therapy session that you can go to that subconscious level, you get there, but then it's like you go back to normal life. And even if cognitively, you've realized, you've made the connections to say, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense now. That's great. It makes so much sense. And I understand it. There's the doing part. That is what's going to complete that process for you, to really allow you to integrate and become more of self with a capital S. And so it's that consistency in the awareness of when you're, my child part is coming up. My child part is rearing its head, or, okay, that was my parent right there. Parent, you can take a back seat now. Adult is coming up to play, and you can become more aware. And then with this consistency, then is really when you fly out of that cocoon like a butterfly. But then, of course, there's more work to be done. There's another part of the child that got harmed somewhere along the way. So again, like I said, I mean, this process of ego integration is it's constant. It's just constant. And I think what we need to realize as people is that you can't get exhausted by the process. You almost have to just rest in it, because and try to only focus on one aspect at a time. It is a lot of work to try to focus on a bunch of different aspects of yourself that are dysfunctional or that aren't working for you. And if anything, that just causes a sense of overwhelm and you don't do anything at all. So we want to make some progress, and we make that progress by not having to do it all at once. Because once you're done, you're done. What's the point of living then if you're done? If you're a finished product, you might as well just go home to heaven. And, hopefully we do reach a state of heaven while we're here on earth, however short or long. But, there's always more to be done. There's always more to be done. And so I think it's important that we find peace in the middle and sitting still in the middle of allowing that process to be the the fruit. We allow that process to be the fulfillment, the pursuit of something. And I write about this in my book too. And people will tell you this who understand life, is that the pursuit, the process, it is the journey. The journey is the reward. The pursuit is the reward. And so we've got to recognize that once one part of us is healed and we may feel good there's another part to be addressed, and another part, and another part. And maybe then a part that we healed 5 steps back starts making some noise again. We have to say, oh, we have to revisit that. And so really fall in love with the work. The next part I wanted to differentiate as we're going through this death of the ego topic is the differentiation of the ego, with the self or the soul. And I just want to be really clear. The self or the soul is really just the part of you that is pure love. It's the part of you that is in being and not so much in doing. It's the part that doesn't operate from past or future. It operates strictly in the present. And we could actually call this your subconscious, because that's all your subconscious just, it's an interesting beast. Your subconscious is dealing with just the present moment, and it deals more in imagery and imagination and feelings than anything else. Your conscious mind is going to be the one who says, using logic and reason, and, well, what about so and so, and what about this from the past? And it's the thinking of all the time frames instead of just being in the present moment. So the self or the soul is really what we want to bring to the surface more. Now, is it possible to operate strictly out of the self with a capital S? I'm going to be honest with you. As far as being a human being, I do not think that that's possible. I think that's part of what is the rapture, is is when we get such a high level of consciousness. It is the complete absence of ego into complete soul and self. And I believe that we all aspire to raise our consciousness to this level. But again, that's the pursuit, right? And that's the whole process of integrating the parts and allowing self and soul to take over. So ego uses past and future experiences to protect itself. The self is who you are really from your moment of creation, without any traumas, without any environmental directions or redirections. It is just pure love. It is gifted. It is pure. It is compassionate. It is joy. And it is peace. And the ego is things that worry, and things that fear, and things that want, and things that start setting expectations. And so, again, I want to preface this by saying the ego is not a bad thing. Freud would tell us that the subconscious, which carries aspects of the ego, is called the unconscious. And he would call this something to be feared, that the unconscious parts of man are things to be feared, and that we should, he had such a negative outlook on the subconscious, so much so that, to point, if you do research on Freud, he's a very interesting man, very intellectual, but very, very hurt, and he had his own demons that were very, very real. But he hated the unconscious. He hated the subconscious. He thought that we should fear it and run from it and quote unquote kill it. Maybe, he's the one who discovered that. But it's not, it's aspects of you. It's still parts of you. And I just think we misunderstand our subconscious, which again is what carries our ego, because our conscious mind is kind of like a buffering system. Before we continue, I wanted to reiterate the layers of the mind, which would be conscious. Let's take layers, right? On the top is the conscious. In the middle is the critical faculty, which is kind of a buffering system, the filter per se. And then all the way below the surface is the subconscious. And really, when we're talking ego and helping to merge these parts and heal the parts, the aspects of the ego, we want to get to the subconscious level. But what we have to do is we have to communicate to our conscious mind. It's okay to take a nap for a second, conscious mind, because you're the one who's, thinking and making logical and rational thoughts that maybe actually are not rational at all. So conscious mind, you can take a nap really quick. But in order to do that, we have to get through the critical faculty. And the critical faculty is just a filter that is put in place that's going to be a buffer that says, well, this makes sense. Subconscious, you can take this in. Or, based on what I know to be true, this makes sense. Okay, subconscious mind, you can take this in. And the cool thing about the critical faculty and the subconscious mind is that when you get to a level of hypnosis, or when you get to the subconscious level, your subconscious mind in that frame, when you're really at a point of seeking, it's not going to do anything that it truly doesn't want to do. That's good, because that means you can't really be like, hypnotized and just be like a walking zombie and like start killing people. It doesn't do anything that it doesn't want to do, based on its level of safety within itself and safety in its environment. So that's the cool part about your layers. And so I guess I will finish this episode by saying, ultimately, we live here on Earth and we are human beings. And to desire anything other than being a human being and enjoying this human experience is somewhat disconnected. Well, it's just fantasy. And so I do not believe that we are on a pursuit of killing our ego, because if we did, we would be, in some regards, numb, and we'd miss it. We would miss using our experiences to bring forth fruit in the world and to make an impact and to contribute in some way. We want to integrate our ego. So let's finish. We'll do a recap by defining dysfunctional ego. Dysfunctional ego is simply the child and the parent aspects of the ego at odds. And we become integrated when we can bring in the adult, whether that's our own adult aspect of the ego, slash self, to be the moderator, or we have the assistance of an adult through the realms of therapy. So therapist, usually it's therapists, friends, family members. It can be tough because they're going to bring their own level of emotional biases especially if the source of that trauma happens to be them. So I would just caution you against that. So dysfunctional ego, child and parent are at odds. And one of those is leading the show, driving the ship. And integrated ego is when when adult / self steps up as the moderator, and we can reframe that process. I just want to remind you that there's always work to be done. This is a constant process, and we're all doing this together, guys. If you're listening to this episode, and especially if you've listened thus far, you're at the very least seeking growth and help in this. And at the most, you're already doing it. And you're going to use this information almost as a reiteration of what you may already know. You just needed a reminder. Or you're someone who's looking to help somebody as they process this themselves. So we're in this together. We're all doing it together. I'm doing this with clients all the time, in hypnotherapy sessions, in Reiki sessions, in just conversation, in coaching, and in the fitness clients that I coach. And people are doing it outside of all of this too, all over the world. We're just being called to do this work. I encourage you to lean into the fear and the discomfort of unraveling and really getting to know and isolating some of these parts, and just be conscious enough to question yourself when you feel like a part is coming up. Once you start doing it, it becomes a lot easier to do. And you begin to recognize when parts are speaking up and out a lot more easily. Meditation is huge in this. If I could give if I only had one tip on my dying bed to give to people, it would be meditate. Meditate daily. Meditating daily has changed my life. It has allowed me to slow down the thoughts. It has allowed me to get still with my creator, to get still with myself and listen to myself more, because the creator lives inside of you. So if you could get still with yourself, you can hear the creator and the spirit inside of you. So again, lean into this, guys. It's not always easy work, but it is so enjoyable. I have to say, this is the weird dichotomy, is that it can be painful, but it is so enjoyable. It brings a level of satisfaction, because not only are you building your pride and your confidence from doing the hard work, you're healing yourself. You have it all right there inside of you. And whether you get the assistance of a therapist or me or a friend, it's not them doing the work. It's not me doing it. It's you. It's just you need the space to be created in order for you to derive your own answers. You are a powerful being. You are a powerful being, and you have all the answers already. You just have to open the lines of communication. And that's what this ego death is really all about, guys. It is, take up your cross. Don't live a life of self. That's what I think that verse means when it says crucify. Crucify yourself, take up your cross. It means that you're not living a life for self pleasure, for self purpose. You're living a life for service to others and service to the world. And in that process, you obtain a level of fulfillment and pleasure and satisfaction and love that you would not get should it be all about self. It's the peace that surpasses all understanding. It's the life everlasting. It's a new life. That's what that really means. Can you get love by choosing self? Sure. A sort of love. But do you get love with capital L? No. No. In order to get love with a capital L, you need to integrate those parts of the ego, put down your striving for self-satisfaction, self-fulfillment, and take up your cross and go forward and do the work, and then serve the world around you. And then that's how we come to a place of ultimate love. That's how we come to a place of ultimate abundance, is by giving. We give in order to receive. We love in order to be loved. There's so much to be talked to when it comes to the mind and how powerful it is. There's so much to talk about when it comes to the mind and the connection with the body and the results of the physical body and why we have disease, why we have cancer, and there's multiple layers and levels to that. But on the topic of ego, I encourage us to stop saying kill the ego, death of the ego. Nobody wants to die. Do you think calling it death of the ego is going to make someone want to lean into that process and do it over and over and over again? Oh, you mean I have to die over and over and over again? Great. That looks like a fun life. Not. Instead, let's integrate your parts. Let's have compassion over them all. And because ultimately, guys, what that allows you to do is if you can have compassion for yourself, guess what? You can have compassion for others. And when you can have compassion for others, that's when you can really feel love and receive it. So that wraps up this episode on death of the ego. I'm sure this is going to bring up some maybe arguments, maybe differing opinions. And there's parts of this I just want to put this out there that I'm not looking for people to fight every single thing that I said in here, because there are examples given that it's more so for the general synopsis, not to get nitty gritty and pick apart each comment as if that were taken verbatim. But the general concept, if you get that general concept, I think you're going to be very well off. And if there's anything I can do to help in that, please reach out, just shoot me a message. But I encourage everyone to start doing this work. All of us carry around some level of trauma or unhealed ego aspect, myself included, and we're constantly just trying to understand those when they come up and nip them in the butt right then and there. Because once that bat flies away, you got to go find it again. So I love you all. This is Death of the Ego, integration of the ego and all of its aspects. And we are collectively doing the work, and I'm just so, so proud of us. Hey, until next time, guys, we'll talk to you very soon. But if there are other topics that you want me to dive into, or just to hear me banter on and on and on about it, which I can do, just email me, sarah@sparkflc.com. You can also hit me up on any of my social media channels. Those links are in the show notes. And until next time, I'll talk to you very soon. Be well. Love you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Ignite the Spark Within. If this podcast brought you value, or you think it would bring someone else value, please hit that share button. My mission is to reach and help as many people as I possibly can. And you just never know who could use that one good piece of information. And hey, if you have any topics, discussion questions, or ideas for future episodes, you can reach me directly at sarah@sparkflc.com and just write podcast in the subject line. And if you haven't already, please rate the podcast on your favorite podcast channel. This helps bring awareness to the show. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you're alerted for all future episodes. Please go ahead and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. And if you're interested in pursuing coaching for yourself, you can visit sparkflc.com for more information.